Berwick had been one of the settlements demanded by Longshanks the previous year, and repeating his
that is hilarious
order in person
That's
was
funny.
met with the jeer.
First War of Scottish Independence, Part 1. Suggestion to me, for me, by me. I think this is the right video.
Alexander III, King of Scots, is dead. Unfortunately, his death has left the ancient Canmore line hanging by a fragile thread. Alexander, in addition to losing his wife in 1275, lost all his children in the 1280s, before tragically dying himself en route to visiting his new young wife, Yolande of Drew, at Kinghorn, in hopes of siring a new heir. The continuance of the Canmore line now hinged on a small girl, the only daughter of Alexander's daughter, Margaret. Margaret had married the King of Norway in 1281, and it was now this 3-year-old girl who claimed the throne of Scotland. Initially, this state of affairs suited Edward Longshanks, the powerful King of England. Margaret would wed Edward's own heir and namesake. The match was even formalized at a summit attended by the Scottish Guardians, as well as Edward, his advisors, and representatives from the Norwegian court on November 6, 1289. The agreement was premised on the assurance that the Scottish realm would remain free in itself, but if Longshanks ultimately hoped for an eventual unification of the realms in the person of his son's heir with the Maid, then this hope was dashed with the demise of young Margaret herself en route to Scotland in September of 1290. Edward, however, remained entrenched in the process of selecting a suitable king from the various claimants. Ultimately, Edward achieved what he wanted from the whole affair, requiring all prospective candidates to swear homage to him as caretaker of the realm. In turn, Edward chose John Balliol as king over the other main contender, Robert Bruce. This video is sponsored by Kamakoto
Skip.
History Marsh at checkout. Thanks again to Kamakoto for sponsoring our video. John Balliol was enthroned at Scone Abbey on 30th of November 1292, the feast of St. Andrew, Scotland's patron saint and protector. King Edward himself pointedly did not attend the ceremony. As arbiter and kingmaker, Edward by demonstration was John's feudal overlord. In short, the King of Scots attended the coronation of English monarchs, but not vice versa. Most importantly for Edward, Balliol had unambiguously sworn fealty to him before leaving for Scone, and at Newcastle on December 26, 1292, the new King of Scots knelt before the King of England as his sworn man. Longshanks unashamedly proceeded as he had begun, and took every opportunity to humiliate and demonstrate his superior lordship over both the new king and his subjects, reversing legal rulings of the Guardians made during the interregnum, and even summoning King John himself in October of 1293 to appear before the English Parliament to answer the appeal of a Scottish lord. Such humiliations were too much, even for the meek John Balliol, and specifically his leading lords. Indeed, his weakness as king could also be bent to the will of others other than Longshanks. Ironically, Edward himself, as Duke of Gascony, had been summoned by his own feudal lord, King Philip of France, to answer for English attacks on French seamen. Following his refusal, Philip pounced, seizing Edward's lands in May of 1294. Further trouble erupted in Wales in September. Edward had crushed this revolt by May of 1295, but soon discovered that opposition was brewing in Scotland too. By this time, the Scots had elected a council to govern in Balliol's name, and made common cause with Edward's enemy by concluding an alliance with France in October of the same year.
You can't have an independent Scotland without not making an alliance with France to fight England.
Unfortunately for the defiant Scots, King Edward focused his wrath on them, ordering a general muster at Newcastle to assemble by the 1st of March 1296. The Scots Council issued its own call to arms, ordering all free men to assemble at Cadonlee, just north of Selkirk. Edward advanced on Wark, occupying the castle on the River Tweed, before halting during the Holy Week. In late March, however, the Scots poured over the border into England, ravaging villages on their approach to Carlisle. The Scots, however, were repelled by the defenders led by the Bruce, the Lord of Annandale, and the Earl of Carrick. Failing to take Carlisle, the Earl of Buchan turned his forces to cutting a path of destruction through Northumberland, burning villages and churches, though this failed to draw the wrath of Edward away from his eastern march into Scottish lands. Edward's anger was directed towards the lucrative town of Berwick on the Tweed. The attack had begun from the sea, but the 4 leading ships ran aground and were set upon by the furious Scots, the crews cut to pieces, and their vessels fired. This initial success inflamed.
Bro. It's I'm surprised that England and Scotland managed to even like withstand in a union. When you think about it, right? England and Scotland uniting, that's kind of a cursed event. Like, that's kind of one of those like historical events where if someone had to predict it, like, it's just kind of very uncanny. It's one of those uncanny historical things to happen. But like watching all of this and just thinking, what, like, yo, these two countries are in a union now. It's wild. Although I do know about the whole Scottish independence thing. Although I heard that the United Kingdom court passed a law banning Scottish independence. So that's interesting.
Claimed the confidence of the defenders to the degree of defying Edward in person when he arrived. Berwick had been one of the settlements demanded by Longshanks the previous year, and repeating his
that is hilarious
order in person
That's
was
funny.
met with the jeers of his enemies, with an English source even writing that one particular brazen defender bared his behind in the presence of Edward. Given such defiance, it may be surprising to learn that Berwick itself was defended only by a feeble wooden palisade. Edward thus led his armoured knights in an assault, brushing aside the rotted fortifications and driving the Scots into the narrow streets. In contrast to the usual framing of this event as a wicked act of brutality, the sack of Berwick actually saw Edward merely adhering to the normal code of war when encountering a defiant town. A town or settlement that refused to surrender left itself open to sacking. Chivalric practice concerning the garrison was also within the realms of normality, as Edward offered life and limb to the 200-strong garrison in the town's castle under the command of William.
I like this format. I like this format. History Marsh, you should do this format more. This format is actually like really entertaining. Like the whole like animation drawings. This is really
the Lord
cool.
of Douglas, which was accepted in exchange for Douglas's own surrender.
And like
Edward remained in the charred ruins of Berwick for around a month, improving its defences with a huge ditch some 80 feet wide by 40 feet deep. It was here that he received a firm message of defiance from the King of Scots, with John Balliol formally renouncing his homage and fealty, extorted by Edward's violent pressure. Dunbar Castle was the next English target. On paper, the castle was already in English hands, as the castle's lord, Patrick, the Earl of March, had sworn fealty to and was loyal to King Edward, even being present with him at Berwick. Despite this, however, it appears that March's wife, the current custodian of Dunbar, switched sides and retained the stronghold for Balliol. Unfortunately, the men of Dunbar quickly realized that though they may be able to resist a siege, they could not do so for long. Edward had sent John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, north to capture it with a few thousand men. Dunbar's garrison asked to send word to Balliol to gauge the correct terms of surrender. The King of Scots was encamped some 10 miles to the west at Haddington, and, instead of meekly offering surrender terms, resolved to fight, sending word back to Dunbar to resist. King John sent a force to repel Surrey's army under the command of John Comyn. It's likely that the numbers involved were quite small. The English force under the Earl of Surrey was likely larger, but suffered the disadvantage of being trapped between the two Scottish forces within Dunbar itself and on the hill overlooking them. The Scots had arrived to combat Surrey's besieging army on the morning of the 27th of April, and they formed up on the high ground of Spottismuir, near Doon Hill. Surprisingly unconcerned with the Scots' decent defensive position, Surrey mirrored the Scottish split by leaving his infantry to maintain the siege of the castle, while he attacked common Scots on the hill with his own cavalry. Approaching the Scottish position, it seemed to Comyn that the English were relatively few, possibly even retreating, given that their crossing of the Spot Burn broke up their lines and its steep gradient obscured their true numbers. In addition, Comyn may have been confident of a successful charge, given the impetus of charging downhill. Therefore, Comyn charged. The charge, though, quickly devolved into a disorganized and piecemeal attack. The Scots suffered from a similar effect, not realizing the steepness of the gully below them until they were almost on top of it. This hesitance blunted any chance of an effective charge, and when the English, quickly regaining their composure after fording the Spot Burn, countercharged, the Scots broke. The casualties appear to have been minimal, though the Scots were routed. A single Scottish knight, Sir Patrick Graham, was killed. Perhaps more significantly, many men were captured, including the Earls of Atholl, Menteith and Ross, with their commander John Comyn also among their numbers. All told, as many as 100 knights were taken by Surrey, though some managed to escape to Ettrick Forest. The victory was completed when Longshanks himself arrived the next day with the main English army. Dunbar Castle promptly surrendered, as did the castles of Stirling and Roxburgh, without resistance. Later too, Edinburgh fell after just a few days, completing the total Scottish defeat. For John de Warenne, Earl of Surrey, the victory must have been sweet, having helped to secure a key castle for his king and the capture of over 100 high-status Scots. Dunbar appeared to be the seal on King Edward's conquest of Scotland, with control of south and central Scotland quickly following.
Wow! I'm not gonna lie, I did not know that England had conquered Scotland before the Union happened. I did not know that. I did not know that. Wow. That is...
Edward celebrated the feast of St. John the Baptist in Perth, significantly receiving word from his rival king of the latter's submission. On the 10th of July, the ill-starred Balliol was brought before King Edward himself at Montrose and literally stripped of his authority as king. The royal blazon tore from his tabard, earning his nickname Tomb Tabard.
Calling.
John Balliol was then unceremoniously carted off to the Tower, while Edward continued his victory parade. Upon his return south via Perth, the English king had the sacred stone of destiny removed from Scone Abbey and transferred south, as well as the royal...
What? In 1996? Only 1996 did England return that. Bro, and that's the thing, bro. The British Empire, the later British Empire, right? Even though it was, you know, the British Empire, because politically speaking, the term to use was, you know, British, right? It was more of an English empire, not really British. Yeah, there were some other Britannic people that were involved. Yeah, I know, but a large part of it was, honestly, I would say most of it was just an English empire. Like, if England and Scotland, right, had to break apart right now, I would say that England would be the successor to the British Empire, because not really Scotland. In fact, right, when my country was even first colonized, it wasn't even colonized by the British. There was no such thing as British, because there was no political union between England and Scotland yet, right? So there was no such thing as British. Originally, actually, it was just an English colony. It was literally just an English colony. It was settled by England. Later on, it would become a British crown colony after the union of Scotland and England happened, and later Ireland. So, you know, I mean, like, because England didn't just only affect many parts of the globe. To people tend to kind of overlook what England also did to the other peoples of Britannia as well. England colonized Britannia first before it basically colonized the world. I mean, like I say this before, I don't call English people Britons. They're not Britons. They're not Britons. They're not Britons. They're not indigenous to Britannia. No. You know, so I hear all these people talking about, oh, you know, like, oh, the British Empire looted this and that and the next. Me personally, I think it would be a bit better, but you don't have to. This is just an opinion. I'm not really stating this as a fact, but in my personal opinion, I think it would be much more better to say the English, because the Scottish and Irish, they're also British too. Technically speaking, when they were in the Union, they were British too, right? But it was the English who did most of the dirty work. The Irish suffered under English rule. People will say British rule, but that's inaccurate, because British includes Scotland and Irish people too. Irish people and Scottish people are also British. People tend to completely overlook that. And, like, you know, both of these countries suffered too. Like, that's why whenever I hear, oh, the British are so blah, 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 I'm like, no. I'm like, no, bro. No. Say English, please. All right, let's continue.
regalia held in Edinburgh.
But that is
The message was clear.
1996, bro. What
Edward
the hell?
had not only unkinged Balliol, but had effectively unkingdomed Scotland. Now the land of the Scots would be little more than a dependent part of Edward's own kingdom. Edward hammered home this intent by holding a parliament within the husk of Berwick on August the 28th. Here he required all Scottish landowners to swear fealty not to a king of Scots, but to him, the King of England. Edward occupied Berwick for a further 3 weeks before leaving his new province in the care of his champion at Dunbar, whom he made viceroy. By September of 1296, Edward Longshanks must have felt assured of his iron grip over his latest conquest. So much so that he apparently quipped as he handed over the seal of Scotland to Surrey that a man does good business when he rids himself of a turd. In truth, however, not all
disrespect.
resistance was crushed, as even then the embers of rebellion were smouldering in the heart of a young patriot by the name of William Wallace. If you stayed around this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.
So this wasn't the actual rebellion yet. We're getting the context of it. The first, okay. I learned something new here though. But if you made it all the way this far into the video and you're new to my channel, you have any suggestions for me, comment down below. This video was a suggestion, of course. Make sure to like and subscribe. Go check out my other content on my channel. I have loads like this. If you are an active viewer, I suggest you become a channel member as well, man. I think I'm going to be loving this series. Thank you for watching and goodbye.